Good morning, friends. Thank you for being with us today, and thank you for allowing me to be with you through technology. I know it's a little strange to come to a church service and watch a sermon on video. For those of you who are watching online, it's probably not as strange. It just reminds you of the old days. This is how we did church for a year and a half during the COVID pandemic, but it's been a while, and to be honest, I feel a little rusty right now. But today, my family and I are away on vacation. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to get away on fall break, and I thought it was important for me to give this sermon on step 2 of Growth Track this week, and so I thought I need to give the sermon, but I also needed to get away with my family, and so this is the best way to do that. So thanks for your patience with a video sermon today, and I'm excited to be back next week for week 3 of this series. So right now we just launched new Connect groups this past week. We're getting ready to launch a third one on Wednesday, October 12th, this coming Wednesday. So we have 3 new Connect groups, and so many of you have signed up for these Connect groups that we're pleasantly surprised, and at the same time we shouldn't be, because this is a great congregation and you respond so well. So we had the goal of doubling our Connect group involvement by launching these 3 Connect groups, and so many of you have signed up that we have exceeded that goal. We are more than doubling our Connect group participation this fall in these new 6-week Connect groups. So thank you so much for being responsive and for connecting with other people in community. That's part of what we're talking about today, actually. And so this is week 2 of our series Growth Track, and Growth Track is our model for what it looks like to follow Jesus at the well. This isn't the gospel. It's not written in stone. There's nothing magical about this. It just fits who we are as a congregation. And Growth Track is a way of saying, if you want to grow as a follower of Jesus at the well, perhaps this is a good model for what it looks like to grow. It's based on our values that I'm going to read here in a minute. And then there's an action step that coincides with each step of Growth Track. So last week we talked about belonging and membership. So the action step is take the membership class that's going to come up in November. Today we're talking about becoming your best self, growing as a follower of Jesus, becoming the person you were created to be. And the action step is getting into a Connect group, because we grow with other people. We don't want to be Lone Ranger Christians. And so we grow in community. And so the action step is get into a new Connect group, and so on. Every week there's going to be an action step to coincide with that step in Growth Track. And so here are our values that our Growth Track is based on. So first, last week we talked about how the well is a place where you can be honest about both your faith and your doubts. You don't have to hide your questions. You don't have to pretend. You can actually work out your salvation, as Paul says. So you can be honest so that you can spiritually grow to become your best self, and you can partner with God to make a difference with your life. We believe that lots of people have questions and doubts about their faith, and if they're never able to work through those, then they can't get to step 2, where they can grow to become their best selves as they follow Jesus. They just get stuck at step 1 because their church won't allow them to be honest about any questions that they have. So we say you can be honest here so that you can get past the barrier of those questions and grow as a follower of Jesus to become your best self, the person you were created to be, and you can partner with God to make a difference with your life. We believe that's what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus here at the well. So today we're talking about that second value, so that you can become your best self. This is growing in your spiritual life. It's growing as a Christian. It's growing as a follower of Jesus. It's becoming the person that you were created to be. It's growing in your character to be more like Jesus. And there's so much we can say about that, of course, but as people who want to follow Jesus, we're going to look at what Jesus said is the main thing. This is how we grow. When Jesus was asked, this is what it looks like to become your best self, we're going to talk about the answer that Jesus gave today. Now, you and I are living in a time when more and more people are losing faith in religious institutions, losing faith in the church, quote unquote, losing faith in religion. You'll hear people say, I'm spiritual, but not religious. Typically what they mean by that is traditional religion doesn't really help them to be a better person. So they have to look outside of traditional religion to some other healthier form of spirituality to help them be a better person. Think about the implications of it. Think about the indictment that is against religious institutions, that so many thinking, compassionate people will say, you know what, religion isn't going to help me be a better person. Therefore, I have to practice some kind of spirituality that's outside of that in order to be a better person. And that's no surprise, is it though? We live in a time in which there are people who call themselves Christians, but they seem to espouse ideas and follow ideologies that look nothing like Jesus Christ. They claim to be followers of Jesus, with their words, but their actions don't look anything like Jesus. Their attitudes, their lives don't remind you of Jesus. They don't point you to the Jesus of the Bible. Perhaps they hold to white Christian nationalism and political authoritarianism that has nothing to do with Jesus Christ. And of course, people see that in our society and they think if that's what it means to be a Christian, no thank you. And therefore, I have to search for some kind of spirituality outside of this Christian thing that I see all around me. So in a time of disillusionment and disappointment and hypocrisy, we want to talk about what it can look like to become your best self, the person you were created to be as a follower of Jesus Christ. And we have the opportunity every day of our lives to do that. And I saw a viral video the other day that I absolutely love, that for me illustrates seeing an opportunity and taking that opportunity when it presents itself. There's a family who lives on a golf course, and every time a golfer hits a golf ball into their yard, the husband goes out and he lays down on the grass next to the golf ball and waits for the golfer to come up as he's looking for his golf ball. And I think it's his wife who's videoing all of this, and she's laughing hysterically. I absolutely love this video. Let's watch.
Wait for him to pull up first, and then run out. Oh, there he is.
Isn't that video amazing? I absolutely love that. And then if that's his wife laughing, you can tell she's thinking, that's the reason I married this guy. That right there. Now, when I saw that video, I thought of this message because that guy saw an opportunity, didn't he? And here is the first key for those of us who want to follow Jesus and become our best selves, the people we were created to be. Everything that happens to us in our lives is an opportunity to grow. Everything that happens to you, no matter what it is an opportunity to grow. Now, we need to say that doesn't mean that God causes everything that happens in your life. There are some churches who have this belief, this view of God, that God causes suffering in your life in order to teach you a lesson. That God is like, I'll show you, and God causes some horrible thing just to teach you a lesson. That's not a view of God that we have at the Well, and that's not a view of God that can be found in the New Testament. As a matter of fact, Jesus' disciples asked him a question about this. It's called the law of divine retribution. Essentially, God just gets people back for things. And there was a tower that fell on a crowd of people in the time of Jesus, and that was a famous event that everybody heard about. And the disciples asked Jesus, did God cause that tower to fall to punish those people for their sins? And Jesus clearly answered them and said, those people were not worse sinners than anybody else. No, God did not cause that tower to fall on them to punish them for something. Jesus just put the kibosh on the law of divine retribution. No, that's not why the tower fell. He didn't say why. Apparently, it fell because of what we would call natural causes, faulty design, faulty workmanship. But Jesus just completely shot down this idea that God causes horrible, painful things in your life to teach you a lesson. That's not who God is. That sounds more like an abusive father. And if the pastor who's giving a sermon had an abusive father and has never healed from that, well, then you can see why that might be that pastor's view of God. But that view of God doesn't come from Jesus. So we don't believe that God causes terrible things to happen in our lives. We also know this: terrible things happen in our lives. Painful things happen. And it may not be something that is that painful that cuts you to the core. We also just experience annoyances and inconveniences, things that we wish were different, circumstances we wish we could change, but they don't seem to change. And so the takeaway is, if you want to follow Jesus and grow to become your best self and grow spiritually, grow as a person, everything that happens to us in our life is an opportunity to grow. God didn't cause it, but all of it is an opportunity to grow. And so the question for us to ask, in whatever circumstance you find yourself, is how could God help me to grow and become my best self even in this circumstance? Now think about how that question, how that view of your life and that view of your circumstances could revolutionize your attitude. And I'm the same way. All the things that are easy for us to complain about, and we can get negative about things that we wish we could change and complain, and think about how much of a different view it is to ask the question, wait a second, how could God use even this to help me to grow, to become my best self? As a follower of Jesus, where is the opportunity, even in this circumstance, for me to grow? How could that change your view of life? And that is a spiritual view of life that leads to major spiritual growth. So everything that happens to you in your life is an opportunity to grow. And then what does that look like? What does it look like to grow in your spiritual life? So if you asked 100 people on the street, what does it mean to be a Christian? You're going to get a lot of different answers. There are some people now who would say, well, apparently it means you support people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. There's so many people who call themselves Christians who support that. You're going to get other people who would say, well, being a Christian is apparently about looking down your nose at other people and being the moral police of society and looking down in judgment on them. You're going to get people who say, well, apparently being a Christian is being anti-gay, because there are a lot of people who call themselves Christians who are. Maybe being a Christian means that you're anti-science. You believe the world is 6,000 years old and that high school students need to argue with their biology teacher over evolution, because a lot of self-professing Christians seem to think that. You might have people answer, well, a Christian means that you're not intellectually curious and you just accept whatever some pastor tells you, and you're not interested in evidence or thinking critically about facts and reality, because there are so many Christians who seem to look at life that way. Now, Jesus never heard the word Christian in his lifetime on earth. That was a name that was used after his death and resurrection to refer to followers of Jesus. But during Jesus' earthly ministry, somebody did ask him, what does it mean to be a righteous person? What does God want from us? What does it mean to be a good person? They asked this in the form of a common question in that day in Jesus' culture. What is the greatest commandment? And Jesus gave a clear answer to this question as well. It's found in Matthew chapter 22. Let's read it. Someone came to Jesus and they said, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." Now, that's a massive statement. Here's what that means. Jesus says, if you love God with all you are, your heart, your soul, your mind, some other versions of this add strength, and you love your neighbor as yourself, you are fulfilling every commandment in the Bible. From cover to cover, you are living a righteous life. You are a good person. Jesus never heard the word Christian in his earthly life, but he would say, yeah, if you're going to be my follower or be a Christian, this is what that looks like. You love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you love your neighbor as yourself. And if you ask Jesus, what does that look like in my life? What does it look like to love God? What does it look like to love my neighbor? Jesus would give you a 2-word answer. Follow me. Jesus would tell you to follow him. He would say, follow me as I love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and I love my neighbor as myself. I'm showing you what it looks like to live a good life, to spiritually grow, to become your best self, to become the person that God created you to be. And actually, Jesus says to his disciples, follow me 22 times in the Gospels. The Gospels are short books. And for something to be repeated 22 times, it's a big deal. 22 times, Jesus tells his disciples, follow me. One of the most famous examples comes from Matthew 16. Most of us have heard this before. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Now, of course, Jesus was crucified. And so taking up your cross means to do what is right, even when it costs you. It's doing the right thing, doing whatever God calls you to do, even if it causes you discomfort or pain. Your number one value in life, in other words, is not whatever brings you pleasure. It's not being a hedonist, avoiding pain and experiencing pleasure no matter what. That's not the value that's going to help you to grow, to become your best self. Jesus says, ironically, it's when you are less self-absorbed that you become your best self. It's when you act not selfishly, but selflessly that you become your best self. You become more and more the person God created you to be. The less selfish you are, the less self-absorbed you are, and you take up your cross and you do the right thing, even if it costs you something, even if it's inconvenient for you. And when you're willing to approach life in that way, how could God help me to spiritually grow even in this circumstance? What does it look like to be a more loving person, even in this circumstance? How can what I'm going through right now help to form me to be a more loving person? And what is that going to look like? Jesus said, sometimes it looks like taking up your cross and following me, doing the right thing, doing the loving thing, even if it costs you something. And if you are acting out of love and you're growing to be a more loving person in any circumstance, you are becoming your best self. Now, there are people who think that's controversial, believe it or not. The first speaker we ever had at the Well was a friend of mine named Jared Bias. And some of you were here for the early days of the Well when we had Jared as a guest speaker. Along with Pete Enns, Jared is the co-host of a podcast called The Bible for Normal People. It's an excellent podcast if you want to learn how to interpret the Bible and work through questions and doubts about your faith. And they release books as well. And when Jared visited the Well, he was just finishing up a book he was working on, and he kind of tested that material on us as a congregation before the book was released. And I actually have a picture of his visit here. This is back when we all just met on the multi-purpose room floor. We took up like only half of the floor. The Well's triple the size that it was back then. We've come a long way since then, but the point of Jared's book that he released right after that was that Christians are defined by love, not by creeds. And to some people, that is controversial. I remember there were some people who were struggling with that concept, because so many of us, we think of what it means to follow Jesus as you just believe stuff. You believe the right stuff, and that's what makes you a Christian, or that's what helps you grow, or makes you a good person. If you just believe the statement of faith on the church website, that makes you a Christian, a follower of Jesus. And what Jared did was he pointed out what Jesus says makes you a good follower of Jesus. And of course, we already read the greatest commandment. Jesus said in John 13, here's how they'll know you're my disciples. I know it might be a little weird for you to respond to me since this is on video, but I wonder if you would finish this statement for me. They will know you are Christians by your love. They will know you are my disciples by your love. That's what Jesus said. John 13, a new command I give you, love one another. as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. And there were people who listened to Jared's talk back in the early days of the while, and they struggled. Man, this just sounds like lovey-dovey, wishy-washy stuff. Like we're just supposed to be like loving? Is that what it means to follow Jesus? Psh. Yes. That's what Jesus said when somebody asked him, "Teacher, what's the greatest commandment?" Jesus didn't say, pretend you believe everything on the church website. Jesus didn't say, memorize a specific creed. Jesus said, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And how do you love God? You love your neighbor as yourself. Follow me as I show you what that looks like to live a life of love. And there are times it requires you to take up your cross and deny yourself and follow me. But the good news is the less self-absorbed you are, as you deny yourself and the more you do the right thing and you ask God, even in this circumstance, even in a painful circumstance, how can God help me to grow, to become a better person? How can I become a more loving person? That's what it looks like to become your best self. That's the best version of you imaginable. That's what Jesus said. But so many of us have been indoctrinated by churches who just were creed-based, and they just had this narrow slice of the theological pie that their church ascribed to. And they ignored the most obvious things in the world. What Jesus said were actually the main thing, which is to love God and love people and to follow Him. And so we're kind of funneling down here to the ultimate question of what it looks like, to spiritually grow and become your best self. In everything that happens to me, how can I grow to be a more loving person like Jesus, even in this circumstance? Even if it's inconvenient, even if it's causing me pain. In everything that happens to me, how can God use this thing that I'm going through to help me to be a more loving person like Jesus, even in this circumstance? Now, that can be easier said than done. Some of us right now are going through horrible circumstances. And once again, we don't believe that God causes painful things in order to teach us a lesson. That's a sadistic God. That's an abusive parent. That's not the God of the New Testament. Maybe we're praying for circumstances to change. And we wish they would. And it's only natural and normal for you to wish that your circumstances would change right now. Nobody could fault you for that. It just makes you a normal person. But the deeper question that really leads us to grow as Christians, as followers of Jesus, to become our best selves, is that question in everything that happens to me. How can I grow to be more loving like Jesus, even in this circumstance? How does God want to use even this to help me to be more loving like Jesus? That's what it means to become your best self. And we start to become our best self when our questions in life switch from what makes me comfortable to what makes me a more loving person. From what is convenient for me to what expresses love for God and my neighbor. From what gives me a temporary feel-good buzz to what really produces peace and joy in my life. Going from the question, how do I just make more money in life, to what is my purpose? How can I make a difference? Going from the question, how can I minimize pain and maximize pleasure, just live a hedonistic life, to the question, how can I be a good person? How can I do the right thing? And no matter what we face, no matter what circumstance we find ourselves in, that question will help us to become our best selves. How can I grow to be more loving like Jesus, even in this circumstance? That's what Jesus says it looks like to grow as His follower and to grow to become your best self. I wanted to give you some practical resources, some spiritual guides that can help us to kind of flesh out what that looks like. And no matter what circumstance you find yourself in, are there other practices that can help you to ask this question and to grow? And so Aaron Stritzel, who speaks here sometimes, He is a spiritual contemplative. He loves reading mystical authors and practicing different types of prayer, and he is passionate and excited about those things. And so I asked him, what are some good resources to give to thinking, compassionate Christians who want to grow to become their best selves? It was like throwing a steak in front of a tiger. He was like, oh, I can answer that question. He was so excited just to give resources. And so here are some books that he recommended. And for some of you, maybe you want to pull out your phone and take a picture of the screen right now, some titles that Aaron recommended, ways to grow to become our best selves. He said anything by Richard Rohr, pretty much, but specifically Everything Belongs or Falling Upward by Richard Rohr. Brian McLaren's book Faith After Doubt, which we studied here as a church. And then David Banner's Soulful Spirituality, or another work, Human Being and Becoming. Those are some spiritual growth resources that Aaron recommended for people who are asking that question. No, even in this circumstance, how could God use even this in my life, every moment of every day, whatever it is I'm going through, to make me a more loving person as I follow Jesus? And like we said at the beginning, one of the best ways to grow in your spiritual life is to grow with other people in a Connect group. And there's still time for you to join a brand new 6-week Connect group. 2 of them just started this past week. You can go to wellchurch.org. You can join one of those, or there's another group that's starting on this coming Wednesday, October 12th, and you just go to wellchurch.org. Every group has a Facebook group link underneath it. You can just click on that link. That's how you RSVP to the group. They'll let you into that Facebook group and communicate with you. If you're not on Facebook, there's an email address there where you can email, and the leader will get in touch with you. I want to close with this story, and I want to share something out of my own life. A time in my life when I definitely faced circumstances that I wish I could change. And at the same time, it was the time in my life when I grew as a follower of Jesus, when I grew spiritually more than any other time in such a short time span. It was back in 2001. And in 2001, I finished up college. I should have finished college in 1999, but I crammed 4 years of college into 6 years and finished in 2001. And in March of 2001, I had a broken engagement. So my fiance and I dated for 2.5 years. We felt like we were married at the time, but went through a broken engagement at the same time that I was finishing up college, and which is already obviously a major transition time in life. And so that experience kind of set me into, made my head spin. And then that spring, just a little bit later on, I had an amazing experience where I had applied for this internship to work for, as silly as this sounds, kind of a celebrity pastor in the denomination I was a part of at the time, who lived in Kansas City. And I got this internship, which was a huge, just amazing experience to get this internship, and connected with that was a full ride to seminary to get my master's degree. So in June, I moved to Kansas City and started in this internship. And so I went from a really low point in life to a really high point in life, and then moved to Kansas City and started. And I realized pretty quickly that the internship was a lot different than I thought it was going to be. And the experience was a lot different than I thought it was going to be. And it wasn't going to work. And that dawned on me throughout the summer. And I actually resigned from that internship on the morning of 9/11 as the attacks were happening. I drove to the church for our Tuesday staff meeting. I heard on the radio what was happening, and then another pastor came into the staff meeting and gave us the update that the second tower had been hit by an airplane, and then it was my turn to speak. And I resigned from that internship. A few days before that, I had moved in with a family who housed seminary students who were in that internship and who had a full ride to seminary. And so now that I resigned from this internship, I lost my full ride. And that family said, well, this is for students who are in that internship, and so you're going to have to move out. So I went from this amazing high experience to resigning on 9/11 while our country was being attacked, and then essentially being kicked out of where I lived. And I crashed with some friends and slept on their futon. and got a job serving in a restaurant, and went through the fall and winter in Kansas City just completely dejected. What I thought was going to be a great opportunity was gone. I had a broken engagement less than a year earlier. 9/11 happened, and I wasn't in ministry at all, no full ride scholarship anymore, and I was just sinking deeper and deeper into what would be called a dark night of the soul. I wrecked my car in an ice storm in Kansas City, and in that winter, I decided I'm just going to move back to Ohio, where I went to college and where I grew up for most of my life. And so I moved back to Ohio in January of 2002, and my friends that I crashed with then didn't even have a futon, so I slept on the floor. I put pillows on the floor and found a job at a hotel, working third shift. It's called the night audit in a hotel, and just had no direction in life. I was a mess. I hadn't prayed in probably months. I hadn't read anything in the Bible in months. I felt like maybe God has forsaken me. You know, all the pain that I've gone through, the disappointment that I've gone through, my life is nothing like I thought it would be a year ago. And I was angry. I was angry at God. I was angry at life. And I was just sinking deeper and deeper. And then, you know, my job was staying up all night at a hotel where there were no guests, and so it was quiet all night. I got the work done quickly, and I just kind of sat there, just alone with my thoughts and my pain. And life went on that way for a couple of months. And then one night, I finished my work, and it was probably 3 a.m. And I sat down on a chair, you know, behind the hotel desk, and then there was a drawer in front of me. And I opened up that drawer. Now, what do you often find in the drawers of hotel rooms? Now, I know there are probably lots of answers to that question, but one of the things you find is a Gideon Bible. There was a Gideon Bible in the drawer there in front of me. And I hadn't read the Bible in months. I picked up the Bible and I just opened it to Genesis chapter 1 in the beginning. And I had nothing else to do, even though I was angry and hurting. And I started reading. And maybe you've had this experience. To some of you, this might sound too mystical. Maybe some of you have experienced this. There are times when you were at a point in life and you read something in the Bible, and it was like that thing jumped out at you for the first time. And you saw it in a whole new way, things that you had missed before. And that happened to me on this night. And as I read, I read about, you know, Adam and Eve sinning and falling short. But what did God do? God had compassion on them and made them clothing so they wouldn't be naked and ashamed. And God called Noah. And when Cain killed his brother Abel, God was even merciful to Cain. And we have lots of questions about these Bible stories and so on. But as I read, all of the instances of God's compassion, God's mercy, God's graciousness just seemed to jump off the page. And I got into the story of Abraham. And once again, the books of the Bible written in a different culture and in a much different time than ours. And so they require interpretation. But there's a story in Genesis about Abraham and his wife Sarah. And Abraham has a concubine named Hagar. And Hagar gets pregnant, but that creates drama in the family. And Abraham and Sarah kick her out of the house. And so Hagar, who is a slave, by the way, she was a slave in this time. And she and her son are kicked out of their home. They have no recourse. And the scripture tells us in Genesis chapter 21 that Hagar took her little boy, Ishmael, little baby, and they had just a small amount of water that they were given when they were kicked out of their house. And when the water was finished, she took her baby and she laid him underneath a bush where there was shade in this desert. And then she went away at a distance and waited for both of them to die of dehydration. You think about this horrible picture, this horrible circumstance that this poor woman and her baby are in, the horrendous pain that she is experiencing. And I sat alone at 3 a.m. behind a hotel desk, and I read Genesis chapter 21, verse 17. God heard the boy crying. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is this matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." And as I read all those stories of God's compassion, and it was like this verse leapt off the page and confronted me face to face. And at 3 a.m. in a hotel lobby, I sobbed like a baby. And I released that anger and that disappointment, that frustration, anger at God, anger at life in general. I just sobbed when I read about instances of God's compassion. And for me, the spiritual experience I had was God saying to me, "Ryan, I'm a compassionate God. You're not left alone to die. I haven't forsaken you. And I see your pain, and I see everyone's pain. And I'm here. And now let's lift ourselves up here. I'm going to lift you up. And we're going to get on with life. We're going to get back on track. And things are going to turn out okay for you." Even right now, I mean, I'm kind of reliving that moment. And a few months later, I got a ministry job. I moved to another city, started working in a church, and got my life back on track to be the person God's created me to be, to do the things God has called me to do. But it was in that year, from 2001 to early 2002, that was one of the most painful times of my life, but it's the time in my life that I grew the most as a follower of Jesus, that I took the most steps toward becoming my best self. Why? I learned what it felt like to hurt and to have compassion for other people as a pastor. I learned what it's like to go through a dark night of the soul and feel alone and forsaken by God. I learned really for the first time what it's like to have so many questions and doubts that you can't pray, you can't read the Bible, you don't even want to hear it. You don't want to go to church, you don't go through any of those things. You don't want to face any of those things. And I learned what that's like. And I came out on the other side of that, a more empathetic, compassionate, understanding person who had my own depth of experience now. God led me. I don't believe God caused those things, but God led me through those things and out of those things and helped me more than any other time in my life in such a short amount of time to become more of the person God's created me to be, to become my best self. Here's that question again. In everything that happens to me, how can I grow to be more loving like Jesus, even in this circumstance? That's how we spiritually grow as a follower of Jesus. That's how we become the people that we were created to be. That's how you become your best self. So there's so much we could say about what it means to grow as a follower of Jesus. And we'll have so much more to say in classes and sermons in the future, and connect groups. You're going to be able to explore that, maybe in the books that Aaron recommended. But for now, Jesus said, what it looks like to become your best self is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And we follow Jesus to see what that looks like. We're willing to deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow him. And no matter what happens to you, you can ask, how can I grow to be more loving like Jesus, even in this circumstance? Let's pray. Oh God, we thank you for what we know deep down is the truth. There are so many self-help books who kind of promise us, power and an easier life and so many things that are tempting to believe at first, but they just don't pass the smell test. And we thank you, God, for guidance here that is true to life and that gives us hope in whatever circumstance we find ourselves in, that no matter what happens to us, it's an opportunity to grow. Every circumstance that we face in life, even the painful ones, we don't believe you caused it, but they are opportunities for us to grow. And then grow toward what? Well, Jesus gave us clear answers for what it means to grow, to become our best selves. It's to love you and to love other people as we love ourselves. And Jesus says, follow me as I show you what it looks like to do that. It looks like denying yourself and taking up your cross and doing the right thing, loving people even if it costs you something, standing up and speaking out for what's right, even if it's inconvenient. Even if something causes you pain, you can still do the right thing, the loving thing, knowing that you're following me, Jesus says. That's what it looks like to grow and to become the people that we were created to be. God, we thank you for last week and the belonging that we can feel when we're willing to be honest about our questions and doubts and understand that we don't have to feel shame with you, but you accept us as we are and you love us as we are. And then, God, you don't leave us there, but you show us how to become our best selves as we follow Jesus. We thank you and we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.